find your way on. So I'll say hello when you come on, just so I know we're broadcasting to someone. And I'll try to find us too here on my little phone to see if I can see us. It's sort of easier for me to find us. Oh, good. All right. I do see we're here. So when you find us, come on, say hello. I joke about, I have Heidi here with me that I'll properly introduce in a moment. Heidi, I joke about we have our romper room minute.
Ah,
Where I sort of go, all right, I see this person and that
I
person.
love it.
So as people come on, it's always fun for them to tell us where they're at.
Yeah.
So we'll give folks a moment. When you come on, say hello. All right, Sandra is here from New York. Welcome, Sandra. I'm glad you're here. Anytime there's anyone here from New York, I'm just so thrilled. My heart has just gone out to everyone there. And that's your home, right, Heidi, where you normally are?
It is. I live in Midtown Manhattan. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona, but my home is New York.
Wow.
So my heart is with the New Yorkers, with the world, but with the New Yorkers right now.
Of course. Diane's from Southern California. Hey, Sharon. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Shirley from Pennsylvania. Welcome, welcome. I'll just let everyone find us. Hi, Susan from Ohio. Lovely to see you. Sharon from Toronto. Welcome. I'll let everyone find their way here. If you are new to the group, just a little bit about the group. We have every day at 1 p.m. We have a check-in with me. I just talk about a topic. You'll know in the morning. I post what the topic is, so you can post any questions. And then in the evening, I try to have this kind of session with someone who is maybe talking about an experience, a type of loss they have had. Tonight, we're going to be talking about sibling loss. One of the things I've been telling people is, even if you don't have that particular loss, the people who are coming on are unfortunately experienced grievers that just have usually amazing things to say about grief in general. So I tell everyone, you don't have to have this exact loss to be listening in, because Heidi, I know you're just a gem of things from your experience, all you've done in the world too. Kathy's from Florida. Happy Siblings Day. Wonderful. Molly from upstate New York. Linda, Colorado. Daniel's here from Chicago. Hi, Gina from Manitoba. New Brunswick, Canada. Welcome, welcome, everyone. All right. So I thought tonight what we would do is, as always, we're going to tackle a topic, and then I'm just going to chat with Heidi here, and then we're going to open it up for your questions, and some of you have already sent questions in. Heidi, one of the traditions we have here that we just started, this is only like 18 days old or 15 days old, is we're all here because someone died in our life. So I just like to take a moment to have a moment of silence to send that person love and to connect with that person, which is our reason. And it's persons for some people. To connect with them, since they're a reason to be here. So if everyone would join me and just take a moment of silence to connect with those that we have loved that have died, and send them love. Thank you so much for doing that, everyone. I really appreciate it. All right, so Heidi, my goodness, you are a multifaceted person, especially tonight, in that you are, I met you and your mother, I think formally. I don't know if we ever met before, but met formally at Compassionate Friends, and you were just so kind to me. And you obviously have the wonderful show Open to Hope, and Open to Hope Foundation. You're also a counselor, a therapist yourself at Columbia. And you're someone who's had a sibling die. Scott, your brother, died. And now, just one more credential, you're a coronavirus survivor. So first of all, hello and welcome, and glad you're here.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all you're doing for the world right now.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm just following in so many people's footsteps, like you and your mother, Gloria, who have just been amazing over the years. So, first of all, just give us a moment. Tell us how you are physically and about that experience of being sick with coronavirus. And thank goodness you look good and are surviving.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I am too. And it's been an interesting journey and a very strange journey. I live in New York City, as you said, and teach at Columbia and have a private practice there, all devoted to grief and loss. And I got, I didn't realize I was COVID positive, and I left New York City March 14th to fly to Arizona for spring break with my daughter. And a couple of days after I got here, I started getting the COVID-19 symptoms.
Wow.
I had the very classic symptoms. I called the hospital when I got a fever and said, could I possibly have this? I don't know. And they said, you need to come and get tested. You just came from New York. You have the classic symptoms. So I went and got tested. And 2 days later, they called me and said, you need to stay in your bedroom for 2 weeks and quarantine and isolate. And I did. And I haven't been out of my house for over 3 weeks. I'm feeling a lot better right now. The interesting part about this for all of you out there is that as soon as I found out I was COVID-19 positive, I really did not want to tell my parents because they've lost a child. They've lost my brother. My brother and cousin died together at 17 in a car accident. And their biggest fear is losing another child. So making that call was very difficult. And I reassured them that I thought I was going to be okay. I wasn't sure, but I thought I was going to be okay. I felt like I needed to keep reassuring them. And, they're, of course, really happy that I'm doing better now, as am I. So that's been my experience. I am doing a lot better now. And I don't have, any symptoms except for that I can't smell anything or taste anything. Other than that, I'm fine. So thank you for asking.
Of course. And, so many people are not fine. And
Right.
we have many people who are joining us
Yep.
who have people who have had a loved one die recently.
Yeah.
And it's so heartbreaking. And I think about it also, I can't help from your mother's viewpoint. I always talk about those of us who have had a catastrophe catastrophize.
Mm-hmm.
And we also see people on the TV who were like, I was feeling better. And then the next thing you know, they take a turn for the worse. So yeah. I'm sending your mom love because I'm sure, and your dad, because I'm sure they were really frightened. I mean, how could you be?
Absolutely, David. And you're making a really good point. I think for myself, and what I've noticed is that I've had to give myself media breaks because, there's a lot of really, it's horrible what's going on right now. And I am so blessed that I am recovering because many are not. But I noticed when I was really sick, I was so terrified, and watching the media made it a lot worse. Right. So I did have to take care of myself and balance how much media I was going to be exposed to. Right. But like you said, my heart goes out to everybody out there that is dealing with losses, whether they be COVID losses or other losses right now.
Right, right. So we're here to talk about siblings tonight.
Yes.
And I guess just share with us what your story was and what that was like in your life.
Okay, well, I love that you're doing this on National Sibling Day. It's a beautiful thing.
Very open that it was a complete accident.
I love it.
It was like a mastermind of this and knew my calendar, but it's luckily there's things that help us out here. So I'm glad.
Yeah, right. No coincidences in life. It's great. So when I was 20, and this was over 30 years ago, when I was 20, my 17-year-old brother and cousin were driving in a car. My cousin was driving. His name is Matthew. My brother was a passenger, and his name is Scott. And the car hydroplaned, and they hit the side of a bridge, and they basically, the car blew up is what happened. They died suddenly and very traumatically. And I was 20 at the time. My brother was the only boy in a sea of girls. There were 3 girls in our family. It was extremely traumatic to lose him and to lose my cousin. My brother was my go-to person. He was my everything. He was my best friend. And I was his older sister by 3 years. So I just assumed we would take this journey together. We would take the journey of life together. Most siblings spend 80 to 100% of their lifetimes on the earth with their sibling. I thought we were going to go to each other's graduations, have children at the same time, raise our kids together, grow old together, go to each other's weddings, all these different events. And it's been interesting over the life course looking at my losses as I've gotten older and what I miss about him even today.
It's interesting. Sibling loss is important to me because my younger son, David, died, and his brother, obviously, my other older son, Richard. I'm always concerned about him. And that impact, he came with me to a Compassionate Friends conference. We talked about it afterwards, and like, we didn't think about how it would thrust him into the pain and thrust all of us into the pain, especially him. And I was telling you about it, and you said, I couldn't imagine being 20 years old and going to a Compassionate Friends conference and sort of diving into that. So it leads me to my question. What do you know now that you didn't know at 20, or that you would tell a 20-year-old? Or what does, because we always think like someone who's a child or 20 is grieving just like us. So you've been 20, you're now older. Can you talk about that a bit?
I would say that this loss has defined my life, but it hasn't destroyed my life. And early on, I honestly felt like my life was destroyed. The pain was so great that not only did I not know how I was going to survive, I didn't know if I wanted to. I didn't know who I was without Scott in my life. So I would say yes, and that eventually you are going to have post-traumatic growth and grow in profound ways. You know, once you're further away from the loss. Those are things that I would definitely say to my younger self. Right.
And I think in that moment, like you said, your identity is so wrapped up in your sibling, and it's you two in the world, and we have our parents that we connect with, that our sibling gets our world.
Yes, absolutely.
So you and Scott sound like you had a really good relationship.
We did.
I'm sure you have worked with so many siblings over the years and met so many. One thing I run across is siblings who maybe they were at those ages where they were competitive, or they were fighting, or, they were just being young and being siblings together. I mean, there's a word, sibling rivalry.
Yep.
And it produces so much guilt later. And we have to normalize that, like, but that's what siblings are like sometimes. You didn't know they were going to die. You didn't know that was their last hour.
It's really true, David. I mean, sibling relationships are very complicated. We fight because we fight with each other because we love each other. If I don't care about you, I'm not going to invest any energy into you. So, we try on different roles with our siblings. There are safe people. We argue with them. There are rivals. There are playmates. There are confidants. They have so many roles. And sibling relationships can be very complicated. And the difficult thing is when a sibling dies, you don't have a chance to work through that relationship and that ambivalent relationship. And what I always hear from siblings, because I work with a lot of siblings, is I didn't know how close we were until my sibling died. I didn't know what they meant to me until they were no longer here. And, sibling relationships are complicated. And I often hear parents say, the last words I ever said to my child were, I love you. Those were not the last words I said to my brother. We didn't end our relationships like that. So, because I thought I was going to see him again. So they are complicated. Sibling relationships are complicated.
And just like you said, that if there's anyone you just take for granted, not in a bad way, but you just expect that someday when your parents are in their 80s or 90s, they're going to die, but your siblings are here with you for the ride.
Absolutely. They're there with you. They're going to stay with you. They're going to help you take care of your parents when they age. Yes, they're going to be with you until you grow up, until you're old. So it is shocking to lose them.
So some of the things that I've noticed is just over the years, and also in my own life, is that I think about, we talk about children are the forgotten grievers. I think siblings are the forgotten grievers also. I hear, people get asked all the time. I mean, my son's told me, he gets asked, how's your dad doing? Like, your dad's the affected one, not you. So how is that relationship? Because you work now, you know, I mean, obviously you're close with your mother from what I've seen, and she has her grief, you have your grief. How did that play out, and what's any advice you would have around that? Because they're two distinct griefs.
They are. They're different griefs, and I think what's hard is like what you said. The world, not necessarily my parents, but other people would whisper in my ear, "You need to be strong for your parents." The worst loss that could ever happen to you is the death of a child. You need to be there for your parents. You need to not create any more problems for your parents. And so you hear all these messages, and so you feel like, well, maybe I don't have the right to my loss. They lost a child, and so it really serves to minimize what you're going through. And I often hid my grief in front of my parents because I was told to be strong for my parents. So I wouldn't mourn in front of them, and they would wonder, is she grieving? What's going on with her? Because I would hide it because I was trying to be a good kid.
Right.
And I didn't want them to go through any more pain than they already had.
And they're the perceived one with the worst pain.
Yes.
And it's also interesting, I feel the reverse, that sometimes in the bereaved parent community, there are some people who are like, the other losses aren't real losses. This is the worst loss. And I will say, I can't look at my son and say that the loss of your brother doesn't count. Mine's the only one that counts. I mean, all tears count. And I think it's that juggling, because in a way you're dealing with multiple loss in a family. You've lost a sibling. Your parents have lost a child.
Absolutely. I lost a sibling, and initially I lost the emotional availability of my parents.
Right.
There really was a double loss there. I felt like sometimes I had to step into a kind of a parental role and kind of take care of my parents, take care of my younger sisters, because my parents were so wrecked for such a long time. So it's very complicated. The other thing is with sibling loss is oftentimes the surviving siblings, we feel like the wrong child died. Because when a child dies, it takes up a lot of emotional space in a family. There's a lot of talk about that child. There's a lot of reminiscing, photographs, a lot of tears. And so sometimes you think, well, maybe my parents would have been in a better place if I had died. They lost their only son. They had 3 girls. Those kind of things are really normal ways to feel when you're a surviving sibling.
Right. And I had a revelation that on Father's Day, I don't remember which Father's Day it was, maybe the second or third year. It's Father's Day. I can't get out of bed.
Right.
And my son comes over, and he's here. He's 25. And it dawned on me, because he was saying, what are we going to do today? Mm-hmm. It dawned on me, I was looking at Father's Day as this holiday that's done because my son died, And then I had to realize my other son is still here to celebrate Father's Day. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to do, he actually hasn't had his Father's Day ruined.
Right.
And I had to bring myself to show up for him. So that was an interesting lesson for me.
I love that you had that insight and that you were able to do that. And sometimes you have to fake it, if you're in a bad space for the other kids. And the other thing that is really hard for siblings is if parents say, I can't go on anymore. There's no reason to live. There's no reason to be here. Because what the message that we get is we're not enough.
Right.
We're not enough. So, I love that you said, okay, I've got to step up for my son. I mean, your son is now lost his only sibling. I can only imagine how, that's so difficult. And I like that he wanted you to step up and be there for him.
For Father's Day, Father's Day is still intact for him.
Right. He's still got a father.
He's still got a father. And the other revelation for me is that, and I actually heard this from young people at Compassionate Friends, and I'd never thought about this. And it was an eye-opener. And then when I had to practice it, it was even harder. How parents say to their surviving children, how are you? and then sort of burst into tears, because then we begin to grieve for you and grieve for us, and our family is sort of gone and changed and everything. And I had to realize, if I'm going to say to my son, how are you doing? I had to do it in a way where I was prepared to be there for him versus go into my own grief.
Right, because we as siblings will take care of you.
Right.
And we'll put our grief on hold when we see that our parents are distressed. And then we will turn to them and talk, it'll be about us supporting them.
Right. Right. And the challenge, and I think, we're going to have a lot of questions about this. I think the other challenge about that is I had to realize, and this was hard for me as a parent, whenever my son shows up, I could talk about my younger son. I mean, that's our bond, that we have this loss together. And I had to realize, if every time he shows up to visit, it's grief counseling, he's not going to always show up.
Yeah.
And I have to really make sure I place my grief with counselors, with groups, with other support people, and be the dad who, the moment he goes to the loss, I'm right there with him, but that our relationship has to be more than that loss. And it's so hard to do that.
Again, I love what you're saying, because we have one foot in the grief world, but then he's got to be in his 20-something world, his 25-year-old world. And young adults and kids aren't as good at compartmentalizing as adults are. We visit grief for shorter periods of time, and then we need to take a break. So when you see kids that are talking about grief and that are really going there, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm going to go play basketball, and they just flip it off and they go outside, that's a good thing. They're shoring themselves up, and that's the way that they're coping, so that they're not completely overwhelmed.
Right.
Yes, my parents often, especially my father, he would talk too long about my brother, and then I felt like I had to be like a pseudo therapist with him. And then I wasn't a therapist at the time, but I felt like he needed me to listen, and it went on for too long. And I was 20, so I needed to go out and be a 20-year-old as well.
Right. That's also important. Just those little things. I had to learn, cemetery's my thing, not his thing.
I don't go to the cemetery.
Yeah.
I never have. I will for my parents occasionally, but I prefer not to.
Right. Right.
And they like going. It brings them comfort.
Right. So let me read some of these questions that have already come in.
Love it.
Lisa says, my mother had 4 of her siblings die in the past 2 years. She misses them so much. And now our extended family of nieces and nephews doesn't come to holiday gatherings because their parents have died and are not here to celebrate. My mother is mourning the death of her siblings and the abandonment of the cousins' families. How do I reassure and comfort her? The family has unraveled and she seems so sad and hurt.
Wow. That's tough, because it's a double loss. She's lost her siblings and she's lost the nephews and nieces. I mean, I think to just validate and acknowledge and listen, to what she's dealing with is really, really important. And don't argue with the reality. Sometimes we like to say, at least it was fast, or at least, you have other siblings, or at least he didn't suffer, or at least they're in a better place. Those aren't helpful. That's not helpful.
Yeah. And the idea of her mother being hurt and all that, it is balancing. I think for all of us, we have to find the balance between grieving fully and living fully.
I like that, David.
And she doesn't have to be your mother's counselor either.
Mm-hmm. And maybe her mother needs to join a group where she can get support with other people that have had siblings die.
Right.
Or join this group.
Cheryl says, I don't think that there's a subject you could speak on that hasn't touched my life. Once you get to be my age, I miss my brother even more since I lost my son.
Wow, that's big. That gave me chills. I certainly understand that, because your brother would have been there to support you and help you through the death of your son. I mean, you could have leaned on him. So again, it's that supports that person you grew up with that knows you better than anybody else, and that yet isn't here at a crucial time in your life. And my heart goes out to you about the death of your brother and your son.
Kathy says, hi, Heidi and David. I lost my only sibling, Tony, less than a year ago. The most difficult aspect of losing my brother was witnessing his suffering and losing my identity and role in this world without him. He was my friend, protector, greatest supporter. I bet you hear that a lot, that, that's part of that sibling relationship.
It really is. And it's interesting when a sibling, and again, my heart goes out to you losing Tony. When you lose a sibling, there's roles that we try to fill, because now there's a big vacuum and a void, and there's roles as siblings that we will fill, and then there's other roles that will never be filled. Our siblings just represent so many things to us, including a shared history. And when they die, a part of our history dies.
Right. She goes on to say, I'm so consumed and overwhelmed with the grief and anger that it's been a daily struggle to get out of bed most days. I really don't know how life goes on without the one person who knew and understood you the most. As siblings, we're classified as the forgotten ones. I feel my pain is not acknowledged or valued as a sibling. Can you provide us with any resources and support that may be available for grieving siblings, since they are scarce? Are they scarce, or do we just not talk about them? Because I don't feel like they're scarce. They're unacknowledged.
Compared to the literature, and I did my doctoral dissertation on the sudden death of a sibling, and that was 20 years ago, and there wasn't that much there, but there still isn't if you compare it to other losses.
Sure.
In comparison, there's a lot more than there used to be, which is good, but there still isn't enough. And so I would say one of the things out there that's very wonderful for bereaved siblings, there's 2 Facebook pages out there. One is called Sounds of the Siblings, and one is the Compassionate Friends for bereaved siblings. And the only people allowed in those groups are siblings, and they're very powerful groups. So I would say you're here, which is a great thing with David. I think that's really important. And then go and join these groups.
Great. Thank you for those. I knew about one, but not the other. So that's great. Thank you. And the other thing that I think happens in siblings that happens in no other relationships, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no other bereaved person that when you hear they've had a death, your brother, your sister died, that we would go, oh, were you close?
Right.
Like, we're going to assess if you're close to figure out whether we should give you a lot of sympathy or empathy or support. Crazy.
I agree with you. And like I said, one time I heard this phrase, were you close? And someone said yes, but we didn't know it then. So, sometimes after someone is gone, it really magnifies what they meant to you. And the other thing is with siblings, we have different relationships at different ages.
Right.
When I was growing up, my sister and I did not get along. We were rivals and we fought all the time. When I turned 18, we started getting along. And I'm in my 50s today, and she's my best friend. So there's no, we can't work through the relationship once our siblings are gone. And relationships change. They're constantly evolving and transforming and changing.
As we mature and we change.
Yes, exactly.
Here's my last pre-written question. And if any of you have questions, please write them in and we'll go over them. Mary says, I lost my 2 brothers, both to cancer. They were my best friends and always there for me. 8 years and 30 years later, and in this isolation, I'm missing them more than ever.
Wow.
I think the isolation is just a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. What are your thoughts about? I agree, David.
I think, listen, most of us spend our lives avoiding our feelings, and now we're all trapped in these rooms with nothing but our feelings.
Absolutely. And this is the time that we want to reach out to our siblings. We want to call them. We want to Zoom with them. We want to text them. And you can't. You've got your 2 brothers aren't physically on the earth. I mean, we can reach out metaphorically and think about them and, but we can't physically have them here. And that's hard. You have a lot of downtime right now. I think it's more important right now than ever to take care of ourselves, because we do have a lot of time to think in our heads and to think about our losses. Right.
I think absence has become really loud when we're in these isolation times.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here some things. Hannah says, my husband lost his brother and I lost my brother-in-law uh, in September, 32 years old, a month before our wedding. In the
Wow.
new year and post-wedding, I'm grieving differently than him. I pour tears and catastrophize, as you mentioned. He turns to alcohol and doesn't verbalize emotions. How do we support one another when we're showing up so differently?
The way they're grieving can be very common with men and women. I wrote a book called Real Men Do Cry, with Eric Hipple, who was an NFL quarterback and lost his son. So what I want to say is it's a great book for men, because oftentimes you see that men aren't as forthcoming with their emotions, but they share it in different ways. And it is really hard when you're with someone else that's grieving, because sometimes you're doing things differently and in a different place. And sometimes you have to come together and compromise. It can be really difficult. Do you have any thoughts about this, David?
I tell people whenever they mention addiction, I'm like, I would go to Al-Anon. Al-Anon is just a savior for me. And,
Yep.
I always say, sometimes people go, oh, I went to an Al-Anon group. I didn't like it. If you've seen one Al-Anon group, you've seen one Al-Anon group. There's a million of them. Al-Anon is for anyone who's in a relationship with someone who's an addict, or you think they're drinking too much, or that's how they're coping. It'll really help you figure out how to manage some of that for you. And what's amazing right now during this pandemic is you can't go to any 12-step meetings or any Al-Anon meetings, but they're all online. They're all on Zoom calls. You can put in, if you lived in New York 10 years ago, you can go to an Al-Anon meeting in New York now. They're all online. So
amazing.
your city and put in what you need, whether it's, someone's dealing. And the one thing I would say to her is the temptation is to go to your husband and go, you need to go to an AA meeting. And the truth is your work is for you to go to an Al-Anon meeting. And
I like that.
things will take care of themselves for there.
I like that advice a lot. We've got to think about what we can do to create change.
Right. We always want to fix the other.
Yeah.
I love fixing people, and it's backfired my whole life. All right. Leanne says, I feel like anniversaries and seeing the kids takes me a while to get back to my new normal. What can I do to help me bounce back? So I'm assuming she's looking at her other kid, or I don't know if she's saying, and seeing her kids she's probably already commented a little bit. So it's that idea about we must be triggered when we look at other kids and look at our own kids and anniversaries. And, did your mother ever said, oh, if only Scott was here to see this?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And yeah. And so, the other thing is, I think that what's important when we're acknowledging the person that died, especially parents, acknowledge your living children also. Because again, we see 40 pictures of Scott around and one of me. It's difficult. So I'm always saying, raise your glass and say, I really miss Scott. And I'm so happy that my 3 daughters are here and that I've got my 4 children. So, acknowledge not just the person that died, but the people that are alive as well. And as far as seeing my brother in people, I have children now. I have 2 children. And my 21-year-old, I have an adopted daughter and a 21-year-old biological son. I see my brother in my son all the time. Because just he reminds me of him a lot. And that's a bittersweet thing. It's an amazing thing. And then like you said, it triggers me that, oh, geez, my son my kids won't meet their uncle. However, I do keep his memory alive for them. They know him through me.
I'm glad you brought up the pictures and sort of sometimes how we treat dead. I had an experience. I was coming from a retreat and I stopped and was with people in Yosemite, and I'd never been to Yosemite. I was just marveling at the trees and the forest, and it suddenly hit me, oh my gosh, David, I'm here. David will never see this. And I just went into that dark hole of my son will never be here. And the folks who were with me, they witnessed my grief. They loved me and all that. And then later on, someone said, you could bring Richard here. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that. And the thing that I also want to be careful, and I just want to say it because I think it happens. Sometimes we're like, I'm going to treat you so well when you're gone, but right now I'm focused on my dead kids. And we have to really put forth that effort to like say, do you want to go to Yosemite? And not just make it all about the child who will never see Yosemite.
Right, because we do notice that. And you know, our deceased siblings, my brother he hasn't done anything wrong in 30 years. So,
Right.
you know,
Right.
sometimes
That's such a good point. I love
right?
that.
So sometimes
Right.
the deceased sibling can be elevated to the status of God. And I mean, we just can't compete with that. Because we're still human and making mistakes and getting in trouble and doing all these things that siblings do. So yes, so I love that idea, David, to just make sure you balance it out. The amount of time you're spending with the person that died through, you know, organizations and chats and online and going to conferences, et cetera, is great. Balance that out also with the children that are still around. And I know it can be hard because you're grieving and you're doing the best that you can. The other thing I would say is that I'm constantly hearing parents that feel guilty. They feel like, well, maybe we're not being a good enough parent right now because we're grieving. And I wanted to say to all the parents out there, we hear you grieving, even if you're trying to hide it. We know you're in pain. We see you suffering, and we're cutting you slack. We know you're doing the best that you can right now, given everything you've gone through.
That's a gift. Thank you. Sharon says, what can we, that just hit me. Anyway, Sharon says, what can we do to help our daughter who lost her only sibling, her brother, her best friend, on February 5th, 2020? She lives alone 5 hours away from us and is stuck at home with social distancing.
That's really hard. I would just say touch base with her, check in with her, get your eyes on her through Zoom or FaceTime, because it's easier to really figure out what's going on if you can see somebody. Give her resources, the Facebook pages that I've told you about. David, this group, I don't know if she would go, but if she would do this, any kind of resources where she doesn't feel like she's totally alone. When you lose a brother or sister, you can often feel like nobody understands. Nobody's been through it. Nobody knows. I knew nobody that had ever had a brother or sister die my age at all. Nobody. So it makes you feel like what you're going through is abnormal when most of what we're going through is pretty normal.
And I just think, especially if you're 20 or 15 or 10 or whatever, your trajectory is so changed. Your classmates, everyone's worried about prom or this, and you've got a grieving parent and your brother's gone. I mean, I would just think about there's an internal isolation that has to hit you.
Absolutely. I had a sister that I still have a sister, but my sisters were 14 and 19. They were teenagers and I was 20. You're living in two lives because you're living the life of a regular 20-year-old or a regular teenager, but you're so mature in so many ways because you've had this really existential, very unbelievable loss that's horrific, that's rocked your world, and you will never fully fit in with your carefree friends again. You'll connect with them, but on some level, you'll always have a little more depth and a little more, you'll be different.
And I think, you know, when you say that, I think about a couple of things. That one, sometimes you can resent those carefree friends, and they're also not going to get it. I mean, you could have sat one of your friends down and walked her through every feeling you had, and no one's ever going to get your loss but you.
Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, my friends weren't that tolerant. They were I was the fun one, you know, find Heidi, you'll find the party. And I was in college, and after 2 weeks, my friends wanted that Heidi back. They didn't want the grieving Heidi. They were done with that. Because they really couldn't understand. They couldn't relate. And the other thing is with siblings is we often feel jealous when we see brothers and sisters, people with brothers, people with sisters, sibling bond, and we're like, why did my brother have to die? Why is he gone and everybody else's is still here? So that's a very normal feeling.
Right. And I also hear from parents, my daughter, my son, they're just going out with their friends like nothing's wrong. And I tell them, they might need some of that normal feeling. They might need to just have some times. I mean, they've been sitting in a funeral home and a hospital. It might be good for them to just have some time away from it. That's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. It's a really important thing. Kids need to take breaks from their grief. They don't want to be totally overwhelmed and incapacitated. They need to get breaks. They need to have friends that are shallow and fun as ways to distract them. They need to have,
Right.
This is my fun friend. I'm not going to have to deal with this heavy duty stuff. I mean, this is really heavy duty when you have a death in the family. So they need those distractors. Those are good things.
Linda says, as a suicide survivor of a 60-year-old sister, I always feel suicide groups that the parents who lost an adult child have it worse. I'm a big believer there's no comparing in grief.
I agree with you, David.
You might just be in a group that there's more parents, but that's all the more reason to find the sibling groups, because so there's not that sense of mine versus theirs.
People, my friend Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn, who wrote a book, The Empty Room, Losing a Brother or Sister at Any Age. She interviewed 77 siblings, and I'm one of them. I was Amanda in the book. It's a great book. And because it talks really about the sibling loss experience. And she says, the worst loss that could ever happen to you is the one that is happening to you right now, the one that's kicked you to the ground, the one where you don't know how you're going to survive and how you're ever going to go on. Right. And like you said, David, my worst loss is the death of my brother. That's the only loss that I know. And that's my worst loss.
And, in this world, there's no part of me that would know what it's like to have a house burned down. Thank goodness mine hasn't. There's no part of me that knows what it's like right now for someone to have a wedding canceled that they've been planning for since they were 5 years old. I mean, your losses are in the context of your life, not in the context of everyone else's life. Sherry says, my son Gary lost his only sibling in February. Right now, he has no desire to go places that he and his brother shared, like the mountains near his home. He says he wants to, but isn't ready. He says he knows it will be painful. Can you relate, Heidi?
Absolutely. When my brother first died, I didn't want to see photos I didn't need to see any memories because I had everything in my head and I was trying to create some space to take breaks occasionally. So I definitely didn't want to visit places we'd been. I didn't want to look at photos. It was too overwhelming.
Absolutely. I can see that. And, I think we put some of these things in the context of siblings or parents and all that, but we have to remember, even in an all parents group and an all siblings group, everyone still grieves differently.
Yeah.
Some will like the cemetery, some won't. Some will like pictures, some won't. All those things. Someone writes here, the grief and pain that my whole family feels after losing my sibling is so different for each of us. Some of us don't acknowledge her anymore. Sometimes it's hard to know if I can talk about her and bring her up. I hold my breath almost after I do it because I'm scared of others' reactions. How do you deal with those uncomfortable reactions from people when you just want to acknowledge the deceased and keep their memory alive?
My family grieves differently, and one of my sisters doesn't like to talk about things as openly as I do, but that's okay. Right. I still bring up Scott and I bring up his memories, and she doesn't respond. And sometimes, somebody might roll their eyes like, oh, another memory. That's okay. That's the way that I do it, and I don't get upset about their reaction because they do it differently.
And I think that's really hard, that we feel like, your sister might have been rolling her eyes at everything you're doing. Mm-hmm. Then we think we're going to bring out our grief. And of course, it's going to be treated sacredly, just like it is for us. And everyone's going to kumbaya exactly the same way.
Right.
And on planet Earth, it doesn't seem to happen that way, I've noticed.
Yeah. And some people are overwhelmed by hearing things, and and also if somebody doesn't respond, it doesn't mean that they're disagreeing. They might, I know that teenagers often, when you bring up memories, they won't respond, or they'll look at you like whatever. But I work with teens, and they say, you know what, I'm glad my parents are bringing up my brother or sister. I like hearing it. I just don't want to have to respond.
Right. And I would also say to that person that you don't need their permission to have your memories. You don't need their permission for your grief to continue to exist. So let that go. You know, their reactions are none of your business, really.
I like that, David, and I love that this person is having memories and bringing them up.
Right.
You know, it's good. It's a good role model. Who knows who might be enjoying it?
Thank you, Suzanne. Sherry says, thank you for explaining the sibling perspective. Hannah says, should I mention and bring up Sibling Day? I know that my husband hurts when I'm talking to my sisters during the pandemic. I'm the youngest of 5 girls. When he lost his only youngest brother, also people posting online, I'm sure he's noticed.
I think it's bittersweet for him, probably. I'm sure that he feels sad, but I also think he feels.
Say that again, Heidi. I think you froze.
I'm sorry. I think it's probably bittersweet. We feel it reminds us that we miss our siblings, but then you love the fact that she's connecting with her siblings. I think it can be both. It can be both bitter and sweet. And it's okay that he's sad. You know, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Sometimes we need to be with our sad emotions.
And Hannah, here's the hard thing I would say to you. Why do you need him to know it's Siblings Day? You know, if you feel like he's already seen it on Facebook, trust that he gets to have his own experience. You know, he gets to do it his way. I think sometimes, and Hannah, I'm like you. I would love to make sure everyone knows what's happening. I mean, I make the joke about there's what's that about? There's 2 types of people that you go to heaven, and when you get to heaven, there's a door that says heaven, and there's another door that says lecture on heaven. I'm walking in the lecture on heaven door because so I'm the one that wants people to know, oh, by the way, I know you're grieving. Your brother died. It's Siblings Day. Check it out. I mean, and I got to step back and go, maybe it's just for me to know it's Siblings Day. Maybe I don't need to put it in his face, especially if I think he's seeing it already. Would you mention again the name of the sibling book?
It's called The Empty Room, Losing a Brother or Sister at Any Age. And the author is Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn. And she's a journalist. It's very well written. I don't know if you know The Boy in the Bubble, the story, The Boy in the Bubble. Her brother was the boy in the bubble.
Oh, wow.
And when she was 14, he died. He lived in a bubble in a hospital for 10 years. So, and it was her only sibling. So she's interviewed all these people and woven in her own story. It's very powerful. I underlined every page in it because it resonated so much with me.
So we're almost out of time here. Would you let people know how they can find out more about you, your work, your organization?
Sure. I'm the executive director and founder of the Open to Hope Foundation. So it's Open to Hope. My mom and I do it together. And we have weekly podcasts on finding hope after loss and weekly cable television shows. So just go to Open to Hope. Everything is online. And
they are amazing. So please check it out. And I'm just, like I said, I'm so appreciative to you. You are, I just had so many elders, and I don't mean elders chronological age, but elders who went through grief before me that so helped me in my journey. And you and your mom are one of those people, both 2 of those people. So you just mean the world to me. And I so appreciate you taking on this topic and sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. And I just love that you're healthy again and recovering from coronavirus, and you're here to share your knowledge with us. So thank you again. I so appreciate it.
Well, David, thank you. My heart breaks for you in your own loss. And I'm thinking about your surviving son also. And I just want to thank you for building awareness for sibling loss and for all the hope that you're bringing into the world right now.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. So thank you for being on the show so much, Heidi. Give my best to your mom. Tell her
I
how much
will.
I love her work. Thank you. So we're going to be coming back to this subject a lot more, and because you're going to see it's coming up. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to be joining us that are going to be addressing different topics. Tomorrow night, we're going to have best-selling editor and author Andrea Kagan on, who's going to be talking about writing and journaling through grief. So that's going to be tomorrow night at 5 p.m. We also have some amazing people who are coming up soon. We're going to have Kim Goldman, whose brother was Ron Goldman, who was murdered. So many of you know her from obviously her history and the podcast Confronting O.J. Simpson. We're going to have the wonderful Diane Gray on, and she's going to be joining us some point in the future. And lots of different people who are going to be here. I know Jason Green is going to also join us, who wrote the book Once More We Saw Stars. So lots of different people are joining us. So that's usually in the evenings here. Every day we do a 1 p.m. check-in Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern. I so appreciate all of you being here and sharing your grief. And even though I'm only on about an hour a day between those two slots, the rest of the time is peer-to-peer support. There's wonderful people here to support you, to talk to. Please don't just engage when we're on. Please engage with each other and support each other so we can virtually hold each other's hands through this challenging time. Thank you all so much. I so appreciate you being here, and I will see you tomorrow.